Wednesday, August 28th, 2024. Costello's alarm rang at 7 a.m. Since starting the substitute for his risperidone, he had microdosed 10 times and was medicating without Avery around. A bit of a connoisseur at this point, even asking about various strains and consumption methods. He figured he's going to be out cycling across America. He may as well treat himself to top-shelf psilocybin. Avery stayed at her place after her shift. She knew he needed to focus on his departure date, so they spent the evening together the night prior. They didn't spend as much time together during this 4-day run-up as they'd hoped. Pushing his departure date up caused some gridlock for them. Costello was still putting together all of his gear, and Avery promised to help line up mental health advocates and organizations Costello would network with. So she found the last few days to be rather assiduous. She nailed every task she set. Costello may have missed out on beautiful evenings in downtown on patios, running the gamut on cuisine, and learning more about each other's physical composition. But they'll have more than enough time for that when he returns. Two things became certain. Costello officially quit his job, and he was several gray hairs richer in facial hair. He didn't have a care in the world about his job. Sure, it was the career he strived for and built it to the point he dreamed of, but it wasn't fulfilling his true personal legend. The cycling tour was something he felt he may never accomplish, something truly challenging and encompassing all the aspects of his being. He was sure he would rise to the position he attained at his job and could have gone on to even higher responsibilities. None of it challenged him. For years, he convinced himself he was terrified of failure, when in reality, he never feared it at all. This tour de Maine has scared the shit out of him, and he wants to find out why. Now, the gray hairs in his beard, that was a problem. He kind of wished it had just all grown out gray, rather than these few indicators of his age barreling along. Regardless, he was growing out this fucking beard. Once when Costello was a teen at the track with Grands, he pointed at a man with a biblical beard. This beard was no spotty Portuguese facial hair. It was that of a Nordic sailor whose father told him stories of the Vasa warship that sunk in 1628. He told Grands he would look amazing if he grew a similar beard. Grands insisted a man of his alluring linguistic sense should never grow a beard and distract the listener. Costello didn't quite understand Grand's point, and it became clear to a man nearby eavesdropping. The man chimed in and said, "A conversationalist leads us down an innocuous path. Many times we disengage from the colloquy and often miss out on the paragon that may have changed our life." Grands nodded at the man and looked back at Costello in a manner of confirmation. Costello established he didn't understand what either of them were trying to put across. He just liked the beard. Years later, he now knows exactly the point both were making. However, he was now confident enough in his speaking, he wasn't going to let that keep him from growing his homage to that bearded man. He also promised himself to forever honor Grand's stance on driving home a statement without any distraction. Costello would find a way to have his cake and eat it too. Something else Costello did during these last few days was go back to reading the Bible. He hadn't changed his faith. There was just a curiosity raging around why it was that so many people reached out to a faith in a higher power whenever they needed help, safety, or uplifting. The microdosing had him studying spirituality connected to psychedelics. He became fascinated with the idea of being introduced to a higher power within your own consciousness. This led to learning about meditation and astral projection. These avenues presented tangible sensory experiences, where worship and prayer felt like when he learned Santa was mom all along. He put so much faith into good behavior only to later learn he was being conned the whole time. The stories in the Bible became roadmaps to understanding human behavior. Reading the lessons laid out in Scripture allowed him to reminisce on friends and family who behaved in accordance with various passages. As Costello began to see the packing and preparing conclude, it was all settling in very quickly. The culmination of all this sapience in retrograde boiled his blessing of this maiden voyage down to a brief preamble and a salute to those who've been part of his puzzle. Costello even scratched out a toast for good measure. Here's to houses for the holy, and warm clothes for the unhoused. A candle for your premonitions, spare time for the aroused. The open road 'cause life is fake, linear time was a universal mistake. A shallow stream to wash your feet, we die alone from skin to bone. May the devil turn to nihilism the day he comes to collect your past due loan. This toast was substantially longer than previous toasts. He felt it appropriate for this tour, a bit of a mission statement. Just as he set his Sharpie down, the sun broke through the skyline. It was time for Costello to finally pay himself back for a lifetime of acquiescence to the world. He got a chuckle from his belly, knowing that meant he was about to turn it up to 6 and probably get nothing but sarcasm. That didn't worry him. It was the ones who may take his seriousness serious. They deserved an explanation, and he had even established one for himself. He was about to be wheels up with a fuselage that wouldn't accommodate his panic. Thankfully, the microdosing was guiding him through this panic and depression. His depression was in a crash course full of troubling thoughts on a loop. The psilocybin's cerebral filing system was slowly teaching him how to manage these thoughts, so he no longer had to cater to the depression. The depression was finally taking a number. Costello ran through a vigorous checklist before pedaling off. The apartment manager was advised he'd be gone for several weeks. Mail was deferred to the post office. Unnecessary utilities shut off. Inventory double-checked. The geolocator company called Costello at 7 a.m. to verify it was good to set his tracking and call schedule. He packed enough perishables to make it to his second stop, in case there's unexpected events and his first stop is closed or limited on goods. He was a step ahead across the board. Now it's time to set sail and make his first pit stop. Avery's. There's no way he's getting out of town without a proper goodbye. She was his primary contact and would be there for calls, texts, FaceTime, what have you. But having not seen each other last night, they needed to share the universe together before he shoves off eastbound in search of his ceiling. Avery had been sitting out on her patio since 6 a.m. She was a full French press deep in Ethiopian beans. The morning had that crisp semblance of positive vicissitude. Almost like you woke up 1 minute earlier than you ever have and were finally witnessing a beauty hidden while you were sleeping. Just as the overindulgence of caffeine hit her, Costello pedaled up with a look of both terror and excitement. She hoped her participation since he began prepping for this tour was what contributed to the look of excitement. She knew him well enough now that the terror would subside as soon as he was in full stride. Avery had plenty of kind and loving words for Costello pre-flight, but she handed him a stack of letters and asked him to open them as directed. Each was written for certain times throughout the tour. She's been as excited about him tackling this challenge that she found herself writing letters for him to read as he'd be traversing the country. Costello grabbed them with glee and a sense of pleasant forecasting, as though he knew exactly what she'd been up to. They locked in all the details of the logistics and finished off their briefing with a very normal and shockingly concerted assertion their contacts would remain consistent and punctual. They basically confirmed they were officially a thing, and it was evolving in an upwards direction. Both were quite content with this concept. Costello was extremely relieved to know she would be there for him as he prepared to do something very few people could ever claim. He shook off all the stoicism and finally came in for a kiss. Avery reciprocated amorously, and both found a marker in the universe they wouldn't have traded for anything. Costello checked his watch and looked at Avery with a gaze that said everything. It was time to begin this tour, and he knew they were about to experience the toughest several weeks they may ever share. He leaned in for one more moment of closeness, and she whispered for him to go before he lost his momentum. She sensed his adrenaline was high, and he was ready to start pedaling. He set his alarm for his first stop and spun his gears for the first time as he officially set off on his lifelong goal. Avery shed a single tear as she smiled and watched him pedal away.